The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. Hello, everyone. So what are, quote, academics like in Montessori? Or maybe put a little bit more simply, do children in Montessori school actually learn anything? And if so, what's it all about? And how does it compare to more traditional school? With me to talk about all this is a very experienced and knowledgeable individual, Miss Sandra Girlato. Now, I'm going to say very little about Sandra up front because I think what's really important is what she has to say here. What I will tell you, though, and briefly, is that Sandra has been in Montessori for a long time, talking well over 30 years. She was actually trained as a Montessori teacher and teacher trainer under the late Miss Renilde Montessori, who was the youngest granddaughter of Maria Montessori. Now, beyond that kind of impressive pedigree or background, I want to share a few quick and simple bio points, and that's Sandra emigrated from Italy to Canada when she was 5 years old, and she now lives in Toronto and heads the Foundation for Montessori Education, which is a training center affiliated with Association Montessori Internationale, or AMI, and that one was founded by Renilde herself. And a last little tidbit about Sandra, she has a daughter who is now in her 30s. I'd say that's it for bio goods for now. Let's meet Sandra for real. Oh, and I suggest listening closely to what she has to say in this one, especially about a quarter of the way in, as Sandra gets at some core elements of what learning is all about for children, and really for each and every one of us as human beings. So here we go. All right, Sandra Girlato, thank you much for coming on the show. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Jesse.
So I just want to jump in with some kind of a little bit crazy talk. And I'll just say, I know some people think of Montessori as, it's just kind of like this hippie approach to education. I'm not going to send my kids there because all they're going to be doing is maybe finger painting out in the woods or something. Does that ring true for you?
Well, it's something that I've heard before because parents have maybe not the clearest or the most informed impression about Montessori, but I would say it's not accurate, that statement about Montessori. There are woods that we can walk through and whatnot, and there's painting, but typically we don't paint in the woods, and we have a whole other system of things that we like to do with our children. So yes, Montessori is very creative and very natural, but maybe not in exactly that sentence as you said it. So we might have to clarify that a little bit. That's a misunderstanding.
Okay. I like how you are very proper in your response to this. You're very, very solid. It's not exactly that, but there's a sliver of truth in there, right? A little bit of freedom moving around and so forth. But yeah. Okay. So I'm with you. Now, in connecting with you, I saw something you had done. I think it was YouTube years ago. It must have been over 20 years ago, maybe, but it was an interview on a television program. And you just came across as somebody who understood Montessori in terms of the learning that children are doing in the classroom. Because some people think of, Montessori, that it's just this peaceful environment and it's wonderful. Children are enjoying themselves, but they don't seem to get a real deep sense of how much these children are learning. So sometimes when I'm speaking with parents, I'll call this academic. So they have a sense, this is connected to what other children might learn in the traditional system, but we know it's something different. So I know you don't like to use the term academics. Can you talk a little bit about why that is? And then what would be the equivalent in a Montessori classroom?
Okay. So I think that the word academics, I think will have people thinking about more of a kind of formal education, something that they may have experienced as a child, sitting behind a desk and a teacher up at the front and giving some instruction with a pointer and the expectation that children will be filled up by this knowledge and remember it and take them with it into life. And we in Montessori don't necessarily see children in that same way. We see children as having a very strong intrinsic motivation to acquire information and to learn very, very profoundly, given a proper kind of setting for them to do so. And the richest time of life to learn is really the ages between birth and age 6, when the brain of the human being is just creating itself. So what Montessori has done is been able to elaborate or establish an environment in which children who are developmentally ready to acquire information can do so with facility and with joy and with a profound level of understanding. So our children will not only receive academics and learn, but oftentimes they exceed or far exceed the expectations of learning for their particular age group. And that's because one of the best things to say about Montessori is that they're in the right place at the right time. So Montessori is all about developmental learning and putting things in front of children that they are ready to receive. And given that children under 6 learn through sensorial exploration, so in other words, exploring with their senses and through movement, that's the kind of environment that's set up for children to not only learn very practical things like how to care for themselves and care for others, but also what I think people traditionally think of as academics, like reading and writing and numeracy and literacy and all those sorts of things. But the environment is different and the materials are different. And I would say to you that the learning is much more profound than in a typical classroom setting.
So, when you say children are learning sensorially or movement wise, and I know there's other approaches to education where we have children moving and, it's kind of a movement based thing. But you seem to be talking about, they're learning more than in traditional school. So how are these children learning, say, math in a movement way and gaining more than a traditional school system?
Okay, so I think it's important for us to also understand that Montessori regarded education in the truest form of the Italian word educare. And in Italian, educare means to elicit that which is already inside of a child. So human beings are naturally at birth already prepared to have a potential that can be fulfilled and to reach an optimal state of development. And so in Italian, educare is to elicit that which is within. So we have a different approach. We're not going to fill up this child with ideas and academics and things that they have to remember. What we're going to do is try to bring out of the child the strengths and the potentials that they have. So if we think about this little person, why they reach a higher level is because if we give a human being allows them to, and their interest drives them to, then they will learn more. So if we can think about something like mathematics, how will they learn about numbers? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to give this child, when they have a need to know about numbers, actually materials that they can manipulate, that they can put together and take apart. So in our particular case, because our number system is based on base 10, we give these little children 10 rods, so 1 to 10, that are mathematically graded. So the 10th rod is 10 times the first rod. And we ask them to build them according to their relationship, which is a unit of difference. So the child can see 1 becomes 2, becomes 3. They have to move them to a mat, put them on a mat, take them away from a mat. There's a variety of things that we do with those 10 rods that the child will begin to appreciate the relationship of 1 to 10 and how our base system is based on that idea. So the child will see it visually, they will feel it physically, because they'll have to move 10 times to a mat to put them there and 10 times to assemble them and 10 times to put them back. But the material is what we call in Montessori a materialized abstraction, which means the idea, number is an abstraction, it's an agreement amongst men. And Montessori has been able to concretize that, make it into a concrete material so the child can hold numbers in their hands. And that's something very, very important, because before we can hold information in our brain, we have to hold information in our body and in our senses. And so Montessori was very Aristotelian that way. So the Greek philosopher Aristotle once said that there's nothing that is not in the mind that was not first in the senses. And Montessori would echo that sentiment by saying that the senses are the gateway to the intelligence. So why is it so profound? Why is it deeper learning? Because most of us, we kind of think back on our own learning, learned about numbers from a paper and a pencil, or maybe a notebook, and we circle things or we underline things. But those activities of the hand and the body never dealt with actually manipulating 10. Mm-hmm. We were making a line or a circle or a coloring in or whatnot, but we didn't actually feel 10ness or 9ness or 8ness or 7ness. And when a child does that, it becomes part of a much more profound place in their brain, because they are driven by their interest, because the material is also very attractive. It is attractive to the child. The child wants to work with that. And when a human being works from interest on things that are well suited for their particular time of learning, the learning is much more profound.
Yeah, and I'm curious, just thinking about the experiences you've had with teachers coming in being trained in this, because a lot of us coming in, obviously we all didn't have Montessori, so we quote learned a lot of what we know as math, language, history, science in a traditional way. And you noted kind of the traditional might be just remembering these things. So we almost have all this just remembrance, but it's not real knowledge. And I like what you're saying when a child goes back and forth, say 10 times, there's something implicit in what he's learning, that the physicality, as you put it, it represents. And when we get more abstract, you always go back down to, oh yeah, I know 10 is this because I counted 10 things, or I did this. Whereas I feel that most of our knowledge in the traditional system is floating in a way, like it's not real knowledge. It's just that my teacher told me this and I memorized it. So I'm curious in that regard, since you're a trainer, how do you work with teachers who are then to kind of help children to do this when they themselves might be lacking what they're trying to aid the child in?
Well, I think that's the beautiful part about working with adults, is really seeing the outcome of both traditional education and Montessori education. So if I can maybe just preface my answer this way, is that now as a trainer working with adults, I see, people are attending the course that have either been a Montessori child or that have been a child of traditional education. And they're very different human beings at this point in their lives. And I can see it in their articulation. I can see it in their understanding of information. And when I find with the Montessori adults, so to speak, the ones that have had a Montessori background, they tend to be able not only to explain things to themselves, but explain things to others, because they hold the information and they understand it. And when I'm speaking to someone who might have been educated in a traditional way, and this is by no means a slam of traditional education, it's just an observation. What they're doing is trying to remember or recollect a fact, but they don't know the fact so well that they can explain it to someone else. It's almost like a regurgitation of the information.
Yeah.
And that's significantly different, because that means that they don't really own the information. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about human beings is that one of the aspects of our minds as human beings is what becomes very tired over time is memory, because memory is challenged all the time. There's so many facts that we have to remember all the time. Where's our house keys? Where's my wallet? Where's my cell phone? And so memory is the one in our brain that's constantly tasked with having to hold on to information. And really, it shouldn't be that. It should be interest should be piqued, and then interest should bang on the door of memory. Montessori actually says this in one of her books. Interest knocks on the door of memory, but then memory has to pass it to knowledge. And if that doesn't happen, then the reservoir for most of our information is in memory, and memory is very, very heavily challenged and very, very heavily tasked, and you will lose that information. But if it goes into a different level in your brain where it's actually knowledge, it's workable knowledge, then there's no concern with losing that information. And if I can give one more example, today in my course, I presented the beginning of the fraction work. Because yes, we do fraction work with little children between 3 and 6 years old, because we do it again in a very sensorial, using manipulatives, really physical activity. And I had one of the adult students weep openly in class when she saw that presentation. And I asked her why she was weeping. And she said, because I have been scared of fractions my whole life, my whole life. And I felt I never understood it in school. I had to study really, really hard for my tests and my exams. And I didn't know what I was doing before the test, and I didn't know what I was doing after the test. But during your presentation today, I actually understood fractions for the first time in almost 30 years of my life. And that's because it's evident. The information reveals the magic of numeracy. And most of us thought, I think math was sorcery for the most part. We didn't get it. It was like witchcraft, what's going on, right? And our Montessori children don't have to worry about that. They see it. They can prove it to themselves.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, it doesn't sound like you're going to slam traditional school, but I'll do it for you then. And it's an observation.
No.
It's an observation and a judgment, in my view, that like the woman that's in your class, and I've heard this story many times from different people, including myself, in one respect when learning Montessori as an adult, is that you're kind of you instill self-doubt, or you start to develop self-doubt as an adult, or even as a young child, when you think you know something, but you don't really know it. And now I'm supposed to tell people, oh, I know this stuff, but inside you don't really know it. And it makes me, this thing about imposter syndrome that comes up a lot with people. I don't think that's a natural element of human beings. I think that's an effect of poor education and poor parenting. So again, I don't mean to slam people in the way of like, you're a horrible person, because I did traditional school teaching for a while, and I had to raise up to kind of realize that this is not the best. But the reality of what you're saying is you see it in children who feel self-doubtful. You see it in adults who would weep after doing a math activity in Montessori because, wow, this is what it should be. So I know you don't want to, slam. I'll openly slam them. So what's the response that you've seen over the years when children discover something for themselves? Like, do you see that as a different than, oh, I've memorized all these countries as a part of a test in traditional school versus, oh, I can paint this map or draw this map from memory, and you just love it in Montessori? Do you see a difference? And what do you see with young children?
I guess what I've seen with young children is the pleasure of learning, the pleasure of discovery, the pleasure of exploration. And when you have that attitude, that things that you take in fulfill you and give you joy, because the joy is, you can feel it, you can see it in a child's response, you can see it in their face, you can see it in their relaxed shoulders. I mean, it's life enhancing. They want to be connected with that material because they are the masters of themselves. And that's an important thing, because all of us as human beings also quest for independence, to be able to do for ourselves physically, mentally, and really spiritually. And that's the quest that our little children are on. And the beauty of that is, in a Montessori setting, they can realize that quest. They can go on this quest and feel fulfilled and feel so capable. And every time a child gets to the end of an activity and has that expression of joy, that is one more deposited into their bank of self-confidence and the completion of the integration of their personality. And that's what we need more in this world. We need people who feel good about themselves, but for the right reasons. They don't feel better than someone else. They just feel good about themselves. And we need these human beings walking in our world, especially in 2022.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you raised that, because I mean, so much on this podcast, when we talk about the child, the adult growing right alongside the child, is that I've tried to emphasize is that there's no way we're going to change the world or change other people if we ourselves don't have that self-confidence that you're talking about, that you develop through years. It's not something you just read a book and, oh, I've learned how to have self-confidence. Like, that's not the way things work. Um, you also noted about pleasure. Edison has a quote, Edison, a fan of Montessori, Thomas Edison, he said, Montessori makes learning a pleasure and it follows the natural instincts of the human being. And you said, I mean, that's the word you use, pleasure, with children. And it really is incredible. And you're saying through even their physical being, you see them light up. And I think the difference of what you just were talking about is what a difference it is to like ace a test in traditional school and then show all of your friends and, look, mom, I aced the test. Versus in Montessori, they're not saying, look at this effect. They're saying, look at what I learned. I know how to read, that type of thing. So it really is something you can't, I mean, talking about it is one thing, but seeing children respond in that way is just, it's marvelous.
And we see it with children, Jesse, right from the very youngest. I mean, I won't say the nido, but I think you can see it in the nido as well with children that are just really newborns, but definitely in the young children's community. So the toddler communities under 2.5, and definitely with 3 to 6s, it's palatable. Their pleasure is palatable. And I think as any of us as adults or educators, to be around children who find such pleasure in doing for themselves, in meeting challenges and getting over the hurdles of any activity, that persistence, that perseverance, that steadiness, that willingness to do it for themselves. They're not doing it for the teacher. They're not doing it for their parents. They're not doing it to show off. They are doing it for themselves. And that, again, is another deposit in their mental health bank, because as we grow older, we should do things for ourselves. And if we can't do for ourselves, we can't help others. So it's, what are we doing, right? It's
No, I love it. And
important.
It's wild because that's, I mean, so much of the work that I do is talking about how you cannot respect others unless you respect yourself. So the foundation is yourself. You have to start with that. But, since we're really emphasizing on this episode academics, I'm curious of this. So as adults, we compartmentalize different subjects, or we separate subject areas because, we need to specialize as adults, and you become, oh, I'm going to really focus on this. But as children, they don't think of math as math and, and this, but in traditional school, it's put that way. Okay, now it's math time. Now we're going to study history. Can you talk a little bit about the Montessori environment, particularly in 3 to 6, and how it's structured in terms of, traditionally it's subject by subject. What's going on in a Montessori classroom?
So in a Montessori classroom, it's important for us not to have subjects, because that's not really how the world functions. So if you go to the grocery store, you're going to have language, and you're going to have math, and you're going to have the exchange of money, and you're going to have how you negotiate by moving through the aisles. So life is not as compartmentalized as we experience in school. You have to have the intersection of those disciplines of man, or those subjects of man. So in the classroom, for the child, it's all important. So there isn't any emphasis put on subjects, because we don't want the child to begin to perceive that the world is chopped up into things, that it's really a whole, as a whole, with different parts in it. So if I can just share with you a little story about a little child I had one time in my Montessori classroom. So I had this little fellow, and we were doing some work with matching of fabrics. And that's one of the things that we do, to help the child develop their tactile sense. And I had like a piece of brocade in my fabric box. And this child was also exposed to the bells in our environment for music. So they learn how to recognize pitch and how to write music and read music. And we also would play music in the classroom. And at one point, I had a picture of Beethoven when I put on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And, there was the picture of him. And I said, this is going to be Beethoven. And he composed this piece. It's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So when we were doing the fabrics together, he said to me, oh, Mrs. Girlato, he said, this piece of fabric must be very, very old, referring to my brocade piece. And I said, well, why would you say that? He said, well, because Beethoven is wearing the same fabric in his picture. And we know Beethoven is very, very old. So therefore, this fabric must be old.
Wow.
And that's a beautiful, what a beautiful
integration
observation by this beautiful child. So There we go. If we had made it just about music or just about textiles or just
Yeah.
about history, no, what he did was he combined. This is the textile from this picture.
Yeah.
This fellow wrote music, but this fellow is also wearing clothing, and that clothing is the same thing as you've got in your fabric box.
Yeah.
That's the way the world should be recognized by our children and by all of us. I know that we compartmentalize to be able to deal with certain things, but it's everything together that we need to learn how to
Yeah.
deal with and to be with. And that intersection of ideas or the disciplines of man, how much better to see the world as a whole versus its parts.
Yeah. No, and I found that in my own life. The more broadly I read. Now I emphasize Montessori, and I read, Montessori is the woman I've read the most of. But the more you read outside of your specialization, the more you actually become stronger in your own, because you can integrate things like this child is doing. So I completely agree with you. It's amazing to see children of that young of an age make these connections, and they're organic and they're natural, and they're not a teacher going, do you see the connection between it happens spontaneously. And I think going back to that, kind of traditional school comparison, you're always answering questions that somebody else gives you. Whereas in this case,
Yes.
You're presenting materials and saying, hey, look at this. And the children naturally gain knowledge through the environment you set up. But it's not you who's presenting everything as I'm the one giving the information, or I'm the one always asking questions. It's the child almost as like a little explorer, his own little explorer. And I wonder, do you see this, what's happening in a Montessori class? I mean, you had mentioned in a larger society, this is the type of thing we need. I know in America, and I imagine some in Canada and it's other countries in the world, there's this, what's real, what's not, what's true, what's not, is this, fake news, that type of thing. Do you think there's any connection with the lack of real learning that went on for years and years and years in most of our education, where we're at a point where people are looking for somebody to tell them the truth versus, do I know what's true for myself? I mean, I have opinions on this, but I'm curious your take, given that you've seen so much as a trainer, and now you're in Canada. So,
Well, what I would say about that, Jesse, is that in order to be able to properly think about what's happening around us as an adult, or assess it, or whatever word you want to use, we need to be critical thinkers. We need to think critically. We need to take in information and be able to bring our own thoughts to it. And that's one of the most beautiful things about Montessori. One of the reasons I even chose Montessori for my own daughter to go to, because I wanted her to not be at the mercy of someone else, or the mercy of the newspaper, or the mercy of social media, right? So that's what our environments in a 3 to 6 environment do. We don't teach the child. Our environment is not a teaching environment, it's a learning environment. And that might seem like the same thing, but they're two different things. The child learns in the environment, the child is not taught in that environment. So that means the child has opportunities to teach himself. The material is autodidactic, to make his own decisions. And oftentimes the material has a control of error in it. So the child can be guided by the material this way or that way, but it's for the child to be able to choose which way he's going to stack those cubes, or which way he's going to organize those numbers, or which way he's going to set out those letters. No one tells him if it's right or wrong. The material will give some influence, but the child has to make decisions around that. And that means then the child has to face a challenge, overcome that challenge, persevere through the toughest times in the activity. But at the end of the day, his work will then be his own work, and he can gain strength from that. Also, the fact that it's a multi-age space where a child can learn by watching others and seeing children who've been there for their 3rd year or their 2nd year and coming in as a little 1st-year child. I can look at what other people are doing and take some insight from that as well. But the child owns their work. The child owns their success. And that's important. They're never looking outside of themselves for the answers. The answers lie inside of them. And that's important when we're talking about dealing with, whether it's politics and politicians and what they're trying to tell us, and or what social media is trying to tell us right now. You need an adult, a person who has the ability to think critically. Is this right? Is it wrong? Does it make sense? How can I test it? And in fact, our sensorial materials are, in a way, very moralistic that way. So our sensorial materials do have a way that they can be right or wrong, but it's up to the child to align things or organize things and get to that outcome. But during that outcome, they're like a little scientist. They have to think about a hypothesis. Do I put this cube next? Is this one next? Then they have to compare and contrast. Does that work? And they make deductions and inductions, which is all part of scientific thinking, which can lead to that critical thinking.
So there's a couple things you mentioned that I want to hop on. But right off the bat there on the last point is, it seems in traditional schooling, we're given the discoveries. So the child is given, oh, Galileo saw this, Newton saw this. But the development up that human being had to make to reach that discovery is like, oh, well, that's not important. We just need to know what they found. And it sounds like what you're emphasizing here is that in Montessori, the child has to make those discoveries. Now, it's not a brand new discovery. We set the environment up in a way in which he can get it, because, a certain amount of genius is needed to reach certain discoveries. But that kind of owning is like they're little discoverers, or the sciences is you're putting it. And I don't think people see too often, because they focus on, well, Montessori children, they do excel more than other children in terms of statistically and test wise, it's in good Montessori schools. But it's a deeper thing that you said, with this profound learning that they're getting. It's something different fundamentally, even if it's just a comparison grade wise or stat wise, right?
It really is, Jesse, because our emphasis on process, not product. I mean, if we wanted everyone to be a genius per se, then just give them the answers and expect them to memorize them. Here, go out in the world. But you know what? We know that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And what's important is the process that a human being goes through from the beginning of an activity to the end of activity. That process, with all its challenges, all its opportunities to make decisions, all its opportunities to discover something that doesn't work and discover something that works. And it's really very beautiful, because it also indicates to a child that there's more than one way to think about something. And if we think of just the example of video games currently, there's only one way in a video game to go to the next level. And if you can't figure that out, then you're some kind of failure. But that's not how life works. There's many ways to resolve a problem. There's many ways to look at an issue. And we have to be able to recognize that. And I think that makes us better citizens. I'm sorry, it does, because...
Oh, go for it. No,
sorry. I was just going to say, because we're going to also meet lots of people who have different opinions. And we have to be open to the idea that, okay, well, they're thinking about it in that way. I'm thinking about it in this way. But we're both thinking about it. And it doesn't have to be they're right and I'm wrong. It just, that's the way they think about it.
And it's funny you mentioned video games, because the hot video games among thinking young children are usually the open-ended ones, where they're just building stuff. It's more creative in that way. But the question I wanted to ask you based on the other thing was, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because it sounds beautiful what you're saying, this process, and the child gets to explore, and science, but what I think of as this normal school parent is, but he's not going to want to do some of this stuff. And then he's not going to learn, the history that he needs to learn, because he doesn't want to do it. And you're talking about process. What if he's, got 4 years processing 2 + 2? I can't wait around for 4, So what do you say to that? Where in traditional school, we've got standards they need to meet, and they need to meet them now, here, So what do you say to that?
Okay, so yes, I get that. And I hear that from parents all the time. And that's fair. That's a fair thing. That's a concern. And again, I think it's just at this point, if a parent talks to me like that or asks me that question, I just know that they don't know enough about Montessori just yet. And the child, when they come into a Montessori school, is not abandoned to their own devices. First of all, We have a responsibility to them. So the environment is set in a particular way with just the right amount of activities and materials for their success. And then you have a trained adult who is going to be their guide in this journey, and who we use the skill of observation to find out, is the child plateauing? Is the child being challenged? Is the child falling back? Is the child moving forward? That's our responsibility to every single child that's in our care, because we know that there's such a potential for growth and development in 3 to 6 that we don't want to miss. So we're constantly looking at every single child in that classroom. Are they ready for the next activity? Are they, how are they doing with this current activity? And we look at them in 3 ways. We look at them in terms of their physicality, their mental development, and their spiritual development. How are they feeling about themselves? What kinds of decisions are they making? And physically, are they controlling and coordinating their movement? We want to see forward movement from this child all the time, and we will constantly and continually put activities in their way or in their hands to get them to the next level of growth. So your child is not abandoned, but I want to maybe tweak something that you said. In traditional education, we work to the curriculum. So that means, hi, I have to show 2 plus 2. And if the child doesn't get it, I don't care, because tomorrow I have to show 4 plus 4. That's what the curriculum tells me. In Montessori, we work to serve the child, not the curriculum. So we have a curriculum, but we're working to serve the child. So if we're going to show an activity and they're not getting it, that means we might have to show that child again or in a different way, because what's important for us is not to meet the needs of the curriculum, it's to meet the needs of your child. So we have a whole curriculum that can be introduced to a 3 to 6-year-old child, but we have to make sure that the child is learning from it, because if they're not, there's no point in us continuing with something.
Okay. So that's helpful for me as this kind of devil's advocate parent. But now that you're saying that, there's another question that comes to mind as the devil's advocate parent. Well, I've got a 5-year-old in Montessori and he's about to turn 6, and you've got him with 3-year-olds. So I feel that this kid's my child's not going to learn what he really needs to learn, because he's going to be stuck with all these little babies. What's going to happen to my child?
Okay, so fair again, but we have to appreciate that the 3 to 6-year-old mix in a CASA environment is extremely beautiful. And why I say it's beautiful is because that's the way the world works as well. We're always going to be with people who are older than us and younger than us, and people who have more experience and less experience. So socially, it's the best place for a child to be in, because I think it's only in traditional education where we segregate human beings by their age. Once we graduate, I've never had the situation where I call up my dentist and they say, Sandra, you can't have an appointment on this day because it's only for 27-year-olds. I'm sorry, only 27-year-olds can come in. Life doesn't work that way. We're constantly in a mix. And the beauty about a mixed age group is that children, and I think any parent, when I make this statement, will recognize the truth in it. Children learn best from each other. So when children are in a mixed age group, even though there's a very well-trained guide with them that's going to help them along their sort of course of development, they will also learn from other children, watching them, being with them. And oftentimes that also spurs interest because they see what other children are doing. And the beauty about being one of the oldest children in a 3 to 6 classroom is that you learn the skills of leadership and mentorship, because you get to mentor that young child. And a person's learning is not fully integrated until they have to show someone else what to do. So if your little 5-year-old knows how to tie their shoes, that's all well and good. But the minute they have to show a 3-year-old how to tie their shoes, that's when they become an expert shoe tyer. Yeah. So it's a psychological development in all of us, really, is that we are the novice in that particular skill, and then we go through a transformation where we become that expert. And we can only become that expert in that situation when we have to turn around and show someone else. And that's the beauty. And so you have these little children who can look up to the older ones, but you also have the older ones who can become leaders. And the other beauty of that is that we never get that anywhere else but in Montessori, because even in our own families, if you're the oldest child, you'll always be the oldest child. If you're the youngest, you'll always be the youngest. But in a Montessori classroom, when you come in as a first year child, you are the youngest. Then you can become a second year. You're the kind of like the middle child. And then you become that third year and you're the oldest child. So there's this really beautiful cyclical kind of development that really helps all of the children.
Well, I'm mesmerized. I'm sold now. So I'm in.
Hi, you know what? I think, when people hear the truth, they can relate to it and they can
Yeah.
appreciate it. I don't think you have to be Montessori trained to hear the truth
Yeah.
and recognize it and really and hold it and appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like going back to that woman that you were training, and you see it if you work with the materials. I know with Sandra and a lot of people that work in Montessori schools, they welcome the parents into the classroom because you sit down with one of those materials and you immediately see, oh my gosh, this is much, much different and fundamentally different than what I received as a child. Assuming you didn't go to Montessori. I mean, that's,
I did
but
not go to Montessori. That's my regret, but that's on my parents. I didn't have a say. I didn't have a say.
well, you've been super helpful in clarifying some of these academic, quote, academic questions that I know a lot of people have. And I wanted to have somebody who thinks about this stuff and has lived it for so many years, not decades at this point. Is there anything that you personally wanted to communicate about, learning, knowledge, or anything? We can broaden it out if you'd like, before we hop off here.
I would just want to say that I would like every person to be able to observe in a Montessori classroom and see what really goes on. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, Jesse, about Montessori, but I'm going to be 40 years in Montessori in a couple of years, and I have never looked back. I work with children. I now work with adults. It is the best, absolutely, unequivocally, the best way to be with children and really to be with the next citizens of the world. I think I think the world needs more Montessori. I think it's as simple as that. And if we had more children attending good Montessori schools, I think we would fulfill Montessori's idea of being that social movement that brings peace to the whole world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I mean, I would say the reason I sometimes will reach out to people such as yourself is I see, and it's oftentimes it's in some of the veterans that have been in this for decades, like yourself. You don't stay in this for that long if you don't love it. And it comes through with somebody like you, Sandra, that, this is what brings you joy doing it. And just to piggyback off what you said, I hope in the world, whether you jump into Montessori as a teacher out there, or if you decide to go into some other field, what I'm hoping is people just love what they do, because we need more people in whatever field you choose interacting with other human beings, whether they're children or adults, who love what they're doing and model that. Because Sandra, I'm actually, now that you say this, I'm very curious. Have you experienced Montessori teachers that might, seemingly understand it, but they don't really love it, and then it affects the classroom? I mean, have you seen that? I'm curious now.
You know what? I haven't seen that, and I never want to see that. I just don't, because I think it should be people who want to be with children and who want to be in Montessori should stay in Montessori, and the rest should just get out of the way of everyone. But it's a people thing, right? Like any other profession out there, it's a people thing, and we attract a whole variety of people to come to Montessori. But I have to say, with my own students, and I've been training adults for many, many years, the transformation of the adult is one of the most beautiful things that I've seen. I do an academic year. They start in September. They finish with me in the end of May. And that person that comes in September is very, very different from that person that finishes off with me at the end of May, because the ideas transform you as an adult, because they touch the very fiber of your soul. You can't be in this work and not fall in love and really appreciate the reverence that Dr. Maria Montessori had for the child, and the genius of her understanding not only of child development, but the disciplines of man, and being able to, as we were talking about academics, take academic subjects and and change them in such a way to put them into the hands of young children. So
Yeah.
we have these young children who are who are able to read and to write and to do math, but also be very socially well adapted and have a way to manage their own environments, to establish and embellish and maintain environments. I used to be a stock and bond trader, and this is a completely different world. But when I took the decision to become a Montessorian, I have never looked back. And
Yeah.
when that student today was crying about the fractions, I was crying right along with her, even though I've done fractions a million times. The beauty of the materials, every time I touch a material, an explosion goes off in my brain, because I cannot believe what a genius this woman was and what care and love she had for human beings.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to end with that. And to any parent or teacher out there who's not into Montessori, please do what Sandra just said and basically go sit with the material and get somebody who understands them that can kind of guide you a little bit, because wow, she's right on. So thank you, Sandra, for being on and sharing your wisdom of all the decades you've had.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you very much for the time and for the opportunity to have a conversation. I'll talk about Montessori anytime. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you.
I'm happy I found you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Coming out of the conversation with Sandra, I don't really have much to add. I mean, I think we covered a good deal in the discussion. I do want to emphasize one thing, though. If you are new to Montessori, or you're a parent of a child in Montessori, but who hasn't really been in the classroom much, so you as an adult haven't been in there, get in there. I mean, work with these Montessori materials. There's no replacement for that. I mean, I can talk all day about this stuff. Sandra can talk all day about this stuff. You can read all day about this, what's going on in the classroom, even directly from Maria Montessori, but nothing replaces the experience itself, getting your hands on these materials, seeing what they're really all about. Okay. If you enjoyed my conversation today with Sandra Girlato, please let us know. You can like the episode wherever that's possible, or leave a comment. Going further, you can subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed. Share it with friends, families, enemies even, whomever you want. Basically, feedback in any form is always much appreciated. If you are interested in reaching out to Sandra, or maybe even being trained under her guidance, visit Foundation for Montessori Education at montessori-ami.ca. I'll also leave a link to that on the episode page. As always, you can reach me, Jesse McCarthy, at montessorieducation.com. Well, pleasure being with you guys, including with the wonderful Sandra Girlato. It was awesome to have her on. So thanks to all of you for joining, and we'll see you next time. Adios.